Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It is most significant that 99 years ago today, at this hour, when the shadows are lengthening across this battlefield that is hallowed by the blood of men who gave their lives in defense of what they believed was right, almost 99 years ago to the hour, the action in the Battle of Perryville started. When the Union Army attacked the Confederate Army that was guarding the pools of stagnant water. In starting this ceremony, I would like to place on the lectern this sword that is symbolic of the Commander-in-Chief of this occasion, the Honorable Governor Bert C. Combs, who has most graciously consented to lead in this Perryville battlefield trek. We're most grateful that the governor saw the need for the leadership in this very special event that is the first of many that we hope to follow. It is most important this evening, before we do anything else, to express our gratitude to the different people who made this occasion possible. The Louisville Civil War Roundtable is your host today. When we had an idea, we came to Perryville, and these people in this community rose nobly to the occasion, and as a result, you have this splendid occasion. I scarce dare to start thanking people for fear that I'm going to miss someone, because so many people participated. But I do want to thank the Intercounty Rural Electric Cooperative Corporation, Mr. Neil Jackson, their manager, for the magnificent help that they gave in making this possible. I'd like to thank the Kentucky Rural Electric Cooperative, through its representative, Mr. Addison McGee, for their magnificent contribution. The Southern Bell Telephone Company came through, and they also made a very important contribution. The United States Army made possible its entire facilities to bring this to pass. Colonel Stronach is here representing the commanding officer at Fort Knox. Captain Sears, the liaison officer, is here. Brigadier General Thomas, Brigadier General Thomas is representing General Bastian, who is the Commander-in-Chief of Fort Knox. I made my first boo-boo today. The local people were represented by Mr. Briscoe White, the president of the old bank, and Mr. A.B. Coyle. They had a lot of help in the community, and much you see here today is a result of the hours that they unselfishly gave. The Department of Parks also gave its all. If you notice the carefully manicured grounds, and we came up here a few months ago and made the initial inspection of this battlefield, we couldn't even find the pile of rocks that marked the grave of General Jackson. It was in bad shape, but the Department of Parks accepted the challenge, and you see here today something that can be compared favorably with anything they have in Virginia or Tennessee or Mississippi or Alabama or any of these places. I also Want to thank the Lexington Civil War Roundtable for their magnificent help. Judge Townsend is the president of the Lexington Civil War Roundtable, and Hamilton Tapp is their secretary. Their advice and counsel and help was invaluable. And I'd also like to mention in closing the unsung heroes of this battlefield trek, those men that started lecturing early this morning and have lectured all day on the battlefield to bring the story of Perryville to the Boy and Girl Scouts. They, I say, are the unsung heroes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I want to turn this program over to our Master of Ceremonies. The Louisville Civil War Roundtable is very proud to have Dr. Philip Davidson of the University of Louisville, our own Dr. Philip Davidson, to act as the Master of Ceremonies. And without further ado, I give you Dr. Davidson.
Ladies and gentlemen, I first shall ask you to stand for the invocation by the Reverend John S. Akers III, the pastor of the St. Philip's Episcopal Church.
Let us pray. O great commander of all Christian armies, hear our prayer. We gather on this battlefield to bear solemn testimony before Thee and our fellow men to our gratitude for all those who have met the rude shock of battle and have surrendered their lives amid the brutalities of war. We pray Thee, Lord, that through their devotion the horrors of war may pass away from the earth, and Thy kingdom of right and honor, of peace and brotherhood may be established among men. Master of life, without whose aid and comfort we are as dust that builds on dust, be Thou now and evermore our great companion. For the sake of those we love, free us from our vanity. For the sake of our nation, cleanse us of our selfish ambitions and foolish fears, that all things may tend to the healing of divisions. Melt our hearts with Thy divine glow of Thy presence, and send us home forgetful of everything save Thy goodness and the infinite debt we owe to our fellow men. And this we pray for the sake of Him who died and rose again, and ever liveth to make intercessions for us, Jesus Christ, Thy Son, our Lord. Amen.
Governor Combs, ladies and gentlemen, my role here today is to facilitate bringing you one of the most distinguished speakers in the nation, one of the foremost authorities on the Civil War. Before I do that, I want to add my brief word to that of the General Chairman, Frank Rankin, of very great gratitude to everyone who has taken part in this extraordinary project. I'm sure those of you who are here realize the magnitude of an undertaking of this sort. You're bound to when you see the crowds of people here and the automobiles in the stand. The second Battle of Perryville may be when we all try to get out the gate at the same time. 2,700 scouts registered at Mackville to make the trek. Over 300 went along for fun. There must have been many more who came directly here. The incredible detail that went into making this possible simply astounds, I think, all of us who see it. And there have been as few difficulties and as few mistakes and as few lost children as I've ever seen in a project of this sort. But it has dramatically, I think, whatever else happens the rest of this afternoon, what we have seen today and what we see here now dramatically demonstrates the tremendous interest of this Commonwealth in its heroic heritage. I don't think either general, either Buell or Bragg, came out of this battle with very great distinction. One of them indeed lost his command, General Buell, because he failed to pursue his advantage. The other was severely criticized for withdrawing into Tennessee and not continuing the fight in Kentucky. The leadership may not have been successful, but the true heroes of those days and of this day 99 years ago were the soldiers, the privates of both armies, whose dead are mingled here on this hallowed ground. A common heritage of us all. And this dramatic outpouring of people and of interest surely will mark the beginning of a new day when we shall preserve this area and these relics in even greater form. We have here on the platform a number of people who've taken part in this. We also do not have some people on the platform who took part in it, as I see by empty chairs. And I'm not certain that the list I have with me is in the order in which they are seated on the stage. It seems to me we sort of scrambled up here, sort of like the scouts scrambled over here. So what I'm going to do is to read, beginning on my far left, the names which I have, and ask that each, thank you so much, and ask that each stand, even though he may not be in order on the stage, and some may not respond at all, being absent. You have already met the Reverend John S. Akers. Judge Collis Reed, I believe, is not here. He's probably still protecting his very excellent exhibit over in the tent. Mr. Hughes Jackson, the president of the Danville and Boyle County Historical Society. Mr. Joe Creason of the Louisville Courier-Journal. Now we get to a person who's here, and a man who's done a tremendous job in this, Charles Weber, the treasurer of Woodson and Kretsch Memorials, the chairman of the Old Kentucky Home Council. Judge Harry Hill, I see, is missing. He's no doubt still out on point 6, reciting his speech. So next to him, I believe, is Brigadier General Everett S. Thomas, Jr., the commanding general of the United States Army Training Center, Armor, representing Colonel Bastian. Next to him, Mr. W.A. Wentworth, the president of the Kentucky Historical Society. No, sir, we've got indeed another person, I believe, a Mr. Adams from Florida. From Tennessee. Well, hooray for Tennessee. Got two Adams, one of them from Tennessee and one from Florida. What could be better? Next, we have, and this one's right, we have Mr. Perry Brown, the superintendent of the Mammoth Cave National Park. And next to him, Mrs. Mary Nichol, who represents the Museum and Shrines Division of the State Department of Parks. Mr. Norris Armstrong, Sr., agriculturalist, former member of the staff of Center College and now on the board of Center. Mr. A.B. Coyle, the mayor of Perryville, and he's done a tremendous job in helping with this. Absent, regrettably, because this would have been dear to his heart, is Judge William Townsend, the president of the Lexington Civil War Roundtable, one of the nation's authorities on Lincoln, man who regrettably is not well today. On my far left, again, I'm not sure in what order, are Colonel Spaulding Crowneck, who's the project officer of the day, and as accompanied General Thomas. Mr. Fred Watts, the editor of the Lexington Herald, who's still editing the Herald in Lexington, I expect. Mr. Joseph P. Clark, the county attorney of Boyle County. Mr. Leslie Downs, state representative of Indiana. Louisiana. Louisiana. We've got some other people from Indiana. We're going to start the war all over again if I don't watch out. Mr. Jefferson Hill. No, Mr. Jefferson Hill didn't get here. Nor, I believe, did the Honorable Morton B. Howell of the Tennessee Historical Society. Mr. Adams, I expect, is representing here. Dr. Lunger, I believe, is not here. Mr. Briscoe White, president of the Old Bank of Perryville. Mr. Herndon Evans, Mr. Cabell Francis, Lieutenant Governor John Donahue from Ohio. Governor Donahue is an enthusiast in the subject and has visited a number of centennials all over the country. Brigadier General John S. Anderson, the Adjutant General of the state of Indiana. Carl Zenor, the Chairman of the Indiana Civil War Commission. And the man who knows more about the Battle of Perryville than any person living or dead, Dr. Hamilton Tapp, the Commissioner of the Civil War Centennial Commission of Kentucky. If you really want to know what went on that terrific day, read Dr. Hamilton's article in the Filson Club Quarterly in 1935. It's still today the best single treatment of that battle. Next to him, Captain W. Cole, the aide to General Anderson. Where'd I lose Captain Cole? Captain Cole, not that yet. Mr. Adam S. Adams, Chairman of the Georgia Civil War Centennial Commission. Florida, and it says Georgia right here. I have done just what the battle did. I've got everybody mixed up. You've already met, of course, Mr. Rankin. The other person other than your main speaker on the platform is a man of rare distinction. You know him, of course, as a man who's guided this state during recent years with distinction and with great credit. Perhaps you don't know of him, though, as the man who was willing to give up 2 tickets to the World Series ball game today in order to be here. Governor Combs, during his years of office, has shown tremendous interest in our state parks, in our whole conservation program. This park itself has never looked so good. Perhaps you noticed those superb permanent markers as you drove in the entrance that have recently been placed there, in fact, in perhaps preparation for this. There's no one, I believe, who's ever headed the government of this state who's been more genuinely concerned about both its historic and its physical traditions and culture. Man who's devoted his life to the welfare of this Commonwealth and of its citizens. It is a very great honor for me personally, and I know to all of you, to have with us today the Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the Honorable Bert T. Combs.
Dr. Davidson, Dr. Wiley, you distinguished visitors, and my fellow Kentuckians, I did give up an opportunity to go to see the World Series, but the Reds lost anyway, so I didn't miss too much. The score, as you know, was 3-2, but Kentucky is ahead 7-6 at the half. I often say to my fellow Kentuckians that there is as much of the romance and history and tradition of this great country wrapped up in this place we call Kentucky as in any comparable space. And I am constantly reminding them that we have the tradition and history not only of Daniel Boone, but of Abraham Lincoln, of Jefferson Davis, and of Mammoth Cave, and of the Battle of Perryville, and of Churchill Downs, and Man o' War, and Kentucky Bluegrass, and Mint Julep, and Eastern Kentucky Mountains, and feuding and fighting, and moonshine whiskey, and Cumberland Falls, and Cumberland Gap, and all those things, which make Kentucky an interesting place in which to live. And it is a great opportunity for me to be here this afternoon to participate in a small way to commemorate the greatest battle of the Civil War fought on Kentucky soil. In particular, do I want to thank the representatives of these other states for their presence here this afternoon, and we are very grateful to them and to the governors of those states for making it possible for them to appear here on this program. At the Battle of Perryville, the North and the South, representing the youth of the nation at that time, demonstrated again the valor and the courage not only of the North and the South, but of America. And so it is fitting, I think, that we pay tribute here very briefly this afternoon to those brave men.
There There's one other event on this program before we hear our speaker. And for that presentation, I'll call upon Mrs. Mary Nichols of the Museum Division of the State Park.
It is indeed an honor to see all of you here today. The Department of Parks considers it a pleasure to be able to preserve this part of the Perryville battlefield for such occasions as this. I have the honor today to present a man to you who has been with the National Park Service for 34 years. He joined the National Park Service while a student at University of California, and he has continually gone through the service from one national park to another. Since 1954, he has been at Mammoth Cave National Park. If you have been there lately and noticed the tremendous interpretive program that they have there, I'm sure you'll realize the job that he has been doing. It's my great pleasure at this time to present Mr. Perry Brown.
Governor Combs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be here today in these peaceful hills on such an important occasion. My mission is to present a certificate and a bronze marker commemorating an event which took place some 99 years ago today, the Battle of Perryville. Unfortunately, the marker did not arrive from the factory. If we could go back to that day so many long years ago, we would find this landscape little changed from the scene before us today. The same hills were present then as today, a patchwork of farms spread across the land. Some of the trees still growing probably stood on that day, brightening the countryside with their fall colors. But on the morning of that fateful day, the atmosphere must have been quite different. The air was charged with excitement, fear, and apprehension. Busy wagon trains stirred up the clouds of dust as the flyers were hauled into place. Perspiring men and horses hurried here and there, preparing for the inevitable. Anxious officers moved about, seeking the most advantageous position for the coming battle. On the day before, there had been some sharp skirmishes and clashes between advanced troops, but the morning of the 8th was the principal one of preparation and reconnaissance. Major General Buell and his Union troops were determined to hold their lines. General Bragg and his Confederates were equally determined that they would drive the Union forces from the field of battle. Many of the men facing each other were native Kentuckians. To a large extent, it was a Kentuckian pitted against fellow Kentuckians. Now we may wonder, what were their feelings as they poised for this battle? At 2 o'clock, with startling suddenness, the battle erupted. A fast-moving detachment of Confederate cavalry charged the Union line. This was followed by a swift attack of the Confederate infantry. The shouts, the cries of anguish, and the crack of the muskets made a fearful din. Fierce and furious, hand-to-hand combat lasted throughout the afternoon. The tide of battle swung from one side to the other. When darkness fell, fighting ceased. All was quiet. In those few hours, more than 1,300 men lost their lives. Thousands were wounded. Therefore, they lost their lives. This bronze marker that we are presenting and will be delivered will read, Perryville battlefield has been designated as a registered National Historical Landmark under the provisions of the Historic Sites Act of August the 21st, 1935. This site possesses exceptional value in commemorating and illustrating the history of the United States. U.S. Department of the Interior, National Park Service, 1961. It will remind us that we should not forget the gallant and heroic effort of men who fought to preserve their concept of government and their freedom. Perhaps this spirit of self-sacrifice is needed today to strengthen our nation in these perilous times. It will remind us that we should not forget the lessons of history. Events of the past can help us guide in the future and make us more sure as we plot our course. It will remind us that we should always be aware of not only the blessings, but also the responsibilities which are ours as citizens of the United States. Placing this bronze marker will keep alive in our minds the Battle of Perryville. These memories can give us a better understanding of this country of which we are a part. They can make us better informed, more tolerant, and more patriotic Americans. Governor Combs, with these thoughts in mind, I present this certificate honoring the Battle of Perryville as a National Historical Sites Act.
You coming back? All right. That's the speaker, and I just wanted to be sure he was coming back. Incidentally, I doubt if any of you have ever seen 3,000 boys together at any one time with under finer control or with better manners than you've seen today. Your speaker and I have been associated one way or another for a long time. He stayed true to the faith as a historian, and I went off into university administration. Dr. Wiley is, without doubt, the foremost authority in the world, indeed, on the common soldier of the Confederacy. He's a man who brings to this task of his, the study of the Civil War, a superb combination of qualities and experience and training. He was born in Tennessee. He was educated in Kentucky, went to Asbury College where he took his bachelor's degree. He took his master's degree from the University of Kentucky in the history department. And I think I must stop here to say that I'm sure all of you realize what a debt we in this state owe to that history department. They have produced some of the finest historians in this country, and they have done a tremendous job in understanding the history of our own Commonwealth. And all of us in Kentucky owe them a great gratitude, and a part of it is for the training they gave your speaker today when he was there as a graduate student back in the early 1930s. He took his doctor's degree in history at Yale University, and he's taught all over the South. He's taught in Mississippi, he's taught in Louisiana, he's taught in Georgia, he's taught in Tennessee. He's taught at some of the finest universities in the country. He's been offered jobs in nearly every other one. He presently is professor of history at Emory University. But more than that, he's no bookworm. He's no ivory tower student who stays in his office with his books around him. He's been out in the field as a historian. He's read, so I have been told, at least 20 or 30,000 diaries of soldiers in the Civil War period of both sides. More than that, he's had the practical experience of a soldier himself. War is no unknown thing to him. It's no textbook affair. He had a distinguished military career, entering as a young man through officers' candidate school, and was mustered out as a lieutenant colonel. And so he brings to the material that he presents to you today the extraordinary combination of training, of interest, and of experience. And it's a very great honor for us here in Kentucky to welcome Professor Bell Irvin Wiley, Professor of History at Emory University.
Governor Combs, Dr. Davidson, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be at Perryville. This is my first visit to this historic spot. And it was an especial pleasure to come by the modern mode of transportation by which I arrived. This is another important first in my life today, my first helicopter ride. And I got to ride with the governor, and I got to ride with the general, and it's not frequently that I get to move among such high brass. My usual association is with the common soldiers, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm very proud to be back in Kentucky. I'm pleased to see the progress that has been made since I was here in school in the development of this historic spot. And I hope with you that the time is not far away when this battle site may be included in the great National Park Service of which our nation has every right to be proud. So Godspeed you in your efforts to get the Perryville site into the National Park system. In Kentucky, the war of the 1860s was literally a civil war, for here brother was aligned against brother. And those of you who are familiar with Kentucky history know that the distinguished Robert J. Breckinridge had two sons who wore the gray and two sons who wore the blue. And there was one Crittenden brother, George B., who was a major general in the Confederate Army, and another Crittenden brother, Thomas L., a major general in the Union Army. Kentucky was intimately involved in this America's greatest war. On both sides, it contributed something like 100,000 soldiers, 30 to 40,000 on the Confederate side, 60,000 plus on the Union side. Names illustrious in the history of the Civil War are Kentucky in their origin and in their association. I come from western Tennessee, not far from the battlefield of Shiloh, and there a distinguished Kentuckian, Albert Sidney Johnston, lost his life on Sunday, April 6, 1862. Another name through its Civil War association, distinguished in politics, Simon Bolivar Buckner, John Hunt Morgan, William Nelson. These are some of the names which helped to make your history of participation in the Civil War illustrious. I'm going to talk mainly today about the common soldiers of the Civil War generally. But by way of introduction, I want to make a few remarks, a few comments on the Battle of Perryville. Perryville represents a blend of the modern and a blend of the old-fashioned. And as you know, one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Civil War is that it was a transitional war. It was the last of the old-fashioned wars. It was the first of the great modern wars. And one aspect of modernity that touches the Perryville campaign is the fact that in preparation for that campaign, General Braxton Bragg moved 25,000 of his soldiers from Tupelo, Mississippi to Chattanooga in late July 1862. This was the largest mass movement of troops by rail on either side in the Civil War, and it was the first one. And as you know, the Civil War was the first railroad war in history. But the old-fashioned aspects connected with the Battle of Perryville outweigh the modern aspects. Reconnaissance left much to be desired. Communications were poor. Staff work was defective. And as a result, the high-ranking leaders were floundering in the dark, so to speak, on the eve of the battle. The weapons were crude. muzzle loaders. 9 motions were required to load these old-fashioned weapons. And I suspect that some of the soldiers on the Confederate side were still using the shotguns that they carried with them into the Battle of Shiloh, though the Confederates had improved their arms situation somewhat by a visit to Lexington just before the fight, in which they appropriated 20,000 muskets. The troops were inadequately trained. Now, many of the men had fought at Shiloh, but the commanding officer of the 105th Ohio, in his official report of the battle, says that his men had had less than 20 days drill, 20 days training, when they went into the battle. Soldiers of Civil War times were trained on the battlefield, and you can get an awful lot of training in a very short time on the battlefield, but it's an awfully expensive way to learn the game of fighting. Troops still charged in mass formation, as they did here at Perryville, with the generals riding up and down the line, recklessly exposing themselves, as General George Manny from Tennessee did in this battle and had his horse shot from under him. And of course, 2 Union generals, Terrell and Jackson, were killed. 3 Confederates, Claiborne, Wood, and Brown, were wounded. It was a furiously fought battle. 1 out of every 5 soldiers on both sides was a casualty at Perryville. And 20% casualty rate is a heavy casualty rate. Indeed, it's shocking in terms of modern warfare. The generals commented on the furiousness of the fighting here. General McCook said it was the bloodiest battle of modern times for the number of troops engaged on our side. General Bragg stated, for the time engaged, it was the severest and most desperately contested engagement within my knowledge. The regimental casualties suffered by some of the units were shockingly great. 3 regiments in this battle suffered casualties of more than 50%. In the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava, casualties were only 36 7/10%. But in the Civil War, 115 regiments, 63 Union and 52 Confederate, suffered casualties of more than 50% in a battle. And there were many regiments, the 27th Tennessee, the 22nd Indiana, and the 1st Wisconsin. They are the ones who suffered losses of more than 50%. And the 10th Ohio, the 98th Ohio, the 105th Ohio, the 75th Illinois, the 79th Pennsylvania suffered casualties of more than 200. On the Confederate side, the 16th Tennessee, the 1st Tennessee, the 9th Tennessee, and the 41st Georgia lost more than 150 men. This battle was fought by country boys. The average age of Civil War soldiers was low. 3/4 of the common soldiers in the Civil War, all through the war, fell in the age group 18 to 29, and more than half of them were farmers. But in this battle here, at least 3/4 of the soldiers were farm boys, because on the northern side they came from the farms of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio largely. And on the southern side they came largely from Tennessee. 21 of the Confederate regiments, at least 21 of them, were from Tennessee. And there were 5 Louisiana regiments, and the 41st Georgia, as I've said, and the 9th Texas. There were some colorful personalities here at Perryville. And the most colorful, and I'm so glad that we have a good representation from Ohio here today, were the Fighting McCooks from Ohio. What a remarkable family this was. Between the 2 families, the tribe of Dan and the tribe of John, as they were appropriately called, there were 14 Union soldiers and officers in the Civil War, and 5 of them here were here at Perryville. 3 of the Dan McCook tribe and 2 of the John McCook tribe. And Dan McCook himself was 63 in 1861, but he went into the Army and he became a major, and he was mortally wounded in July 1863, helping repel the Morgan raid at Bluffington. 8 of his sons went into the Union service. 3 of them became major generals and 2 of them brigadier generals. His brother John, a doctor, sent 5 sons into the Union service, 1 a major general and 1 a brigadier general. And one of Dan's sons
was killed at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, Daniel McCook. And just before the battle, he recited to his soldiers Macaulay's poem, Horatius. And he said these words, "Then how may men die better than facing fearful odds?" And he went into that suicidal charge on this strongly held Confederate position at Kennesaw Mountain, June 27, 1864. And he died gloriously, facing tremendous, fearful odds. Other colorful personalities here were General Benjamin F. Cheatham, an admirable commander from Tennessee, General Patrick Claiborne, who was a native of Ireland and who migrated to Arkansas as a young man and espoused the Confederate cause when the war came along. He was here a brigadier general. He was wounded. He displayed here conspicuous gallantry, and he was commended by his superior, General Hardee. General Patrick Claiborne was one of the very best combat commanders on either side in the war, and he died at the forefront of his command in that terrible slaughter, the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, November 30th, 1864. Then there was Bishop General Leonidas Polk. He went to West Point, but after he graduated, he went into the Episcopal ministry and became a bishop. The war came along, and he went into the army. General Cheatham's standard exhortation to his troops when he went into battle was, "Give 'em hell, boys, give 'em hell." Well, that shocked General Polk a little bit. He couldn't go quite that far, but he did say, "Boys, give 'em what General Cheatham says." And they did. This was largely a soldier's battle. Now, there was some good leadership on the brigade and the regimental and the company level, but leadership on the highest levels left very much to be desired. And after the battle, the Confederates indulged in what was to be a fatal weakness for the Southern side. That is, criticizing each other and the highest commander trying to justify his action by pinning it on his subordinates. And as late as April and May 1863, General Bragg was writing to Polk's subordinates and trying to establish the fact that Polk disobeyed his orders and was responsible for the defeat. And General Buckner wrote to General Bragg one of the finest letters that I've ever read, and it's published in the official records, Series 1, Volume 16, Part 1, pages 1105 to 1107. He said, in effect, "General Bragg, I'm not personally acquainted with you, but I want to be bold enough to give you a little advice. Forget the shortcomings of your subordinates. You made mistakes, they made mistakes. But at this stage of the war, it's natural for leaders to make mistakes. Forget and forgive and be generous and get on with the business of winning the war. Look to the future instead of the past." And it's a great tragedy for the Confederacy that its leaders did not follow that advice. And it ought to be a good lesson for you and me. If you meet a reversal, if you are defeated, don't try to lay the blame or the fault on somebody else or to justify your course of action. But be generous, be forgiving, and get on with the business of living and try to do a better job next time. While the high-ranking leaders floundered and quarreled, the common soldiers did a magnificent job of fighting. And now I want to turn for a short appraisal of the common soldiers of the Civil War, blue and gray. In the first place, these common soldiers were lacking in education. Many of them couldn't read and write at all. They had to get someone to write their letters for them. I recall reading with great pleasure the letters of Private William F. McClellan of the 4th Alabama Regiment. And he wrote to his parents on one occasion that he had several illiterate comrades and that he was carrying on a love correspondence for them. And he added, "I think you will be interested in the fact that during the past month I have got 3 of them engaged." Unfortunately, he didn't reveal his formula. The soldiers were fond of stereotype phrases. They used phonetic spelling. They like to throw in bits of poetry. And a typical letter ran something like this. A soldier writing to his wife, "Dear wife," or as one Reb in addressing his spouse put it, "my esteemed friend." And he spelled it E-S-T-E-A-M-E-D. Well, like you, I was amused when I first saw that, but the more I thought about it, the more appropriate it seemed. A man's wife ought to be his esteemed friend, whether she is or not. I seat myself and take pen in hand to drop you a few lines. And that was standard opening of the letters of the soldiers on both sides. Though one Reb got confused and wrote, I pen myself and take seat in hand to drop you a few lines. But he might have been an acrobat for all I know. I am well at this time, and I hope that you are enjoying a light blessing. I was in the Orful Fight, O-R-F-U-L-F-I-T-E, at Chattanooga. Now, it was unfortunate for this soldier that he had to be in this particular battle, because you can imagine what difficulty was involved in trying to spell it. He broke it up into 3 parts, but he still didn't get it all in. But he did pretty well. I was wounded once, W-O-N-S-T, in the foot, but otherwise I come out safe. I am now in the hospital. H-O-R-S-E-P-I-T-T-L-E. And that was standard spelling for this institution among the common soldiers in both armies. And we know that they called it hospital from the way they spelled it, because they spell words the way they pronounce them. And I am getting along as well as could be expected, though I ain't satisfied. When I get out of here, I am going to try to get a transfer, T-R-A-N-C-E, and then another word, F-U-R. And if you've ever been in the Army, you know where he wanted to get transferred to. And that was to the commissary, where the rations are good and near. C-O-M-M-A, and then another word, S-A-R-Y, was the way he spelled it. For I have seen the elephant and had my fill of fighting. So no more for the present. John Jones to Elvira Jones, your affectionate husband, until death do us part. I thought that was a rather ominous note on which to end the letter. Then he threw in a bit of poetry, and one of the favorites was, when this you see, remember me, though many miles apart. Another, my pen is bad, my ink is pale, my love for you will never fail. F-A-L-E. The handwriting was often so bad as to defy deciphering. One soldier wrote, I had not a like to a made out half of your words. There is some that I ain't made out yet. And I've used magnifying glasses, and I've used infrared lights and all of the modern devices that we have available to us, and I can add my testimony to his. There's some that I ain't made out yet. Private Charles Futch on the Confederate side had a brother in another unit, and they exchanged letters occasionally. Their handwriting and spelling was terrible. On one occasion, Charles got a letter that was in worse writing and spelling than usual, and he registered this protest. Dear brother, I have carried your last letter through 2 regiments, trying to find someone that could read it. But there was not a man that could read even the date of the month. One soldier wrote his home folk, why don't you write to a feller? I hope you ain't all dead. And reading the letters of a soldier who was in the terrible fight at Champion's Hill on the approach to Vicksburg, May 16, 1863, he stated, it was an awful fight. The Yank is almost, and I'm going to spell the next word, A-N-A-H-I-G-H-L-A-T-E-D, us. The Yank is almost annihilated us. Well, he had no business trying to use such a highfalutin word as annihilated. He was far beyond his depth, but even so, he did better with the spelling than some of my sophomores do down at Emory. I was reading a group of letters one day, and I came across this statement. The soldier wrote, I had the camp diary, D-I-A-R-Y, a few days ago. And I was confused because I hadn't run into the practice of organizations keeping unit journals in the Civil War as they did in succeeding wars. But then I read the rest of the sentence, and the mystery was cleared up, because he added, "But now I am about well of it." So I know that he was suffering from what Kentucky soldiers serving down in Tennessee referred to as the Tennessee quick step. A northern soldier who served under General Landers wrote a group of letters, and I was reading along one of the letters one day, and he wrote, "Landers has the Ganders." And I was just reading along. I'm one of those semi-illiterate people who works his mouth sometime, you know. I've got to get a rapid reading course right away. Indeed, its time is far past. So I just read it. Landers has the Ganders. That's what it looked like. But then on reflection, I realized that this G would be soft. Landers has the Janders. Well, what Landers had, of course, was the jaundice, but this was as close as this soldier could get to that. And Landers was very unpopular with this particular soldier. Actually, his name was Lander, but he spelled it Landers. He went on to add, "I hope the old so-and-so will die," except he didn't put so-and-so, and you can imagine what he did put. Well, the next letter in the series was written a few days later. I thought I detected a triumphant note. He said, "Well, old Landers is dead, and I'll bet the old so-and-so is down in hell pumping thunder at 3 cents a clap." A second characteristic of these common soldiers is that they had a delightful sense of humor. Indeed, I have found no richer humor in the whole of American literature than I have in the letters of these common men who wore the blue and the gray. They were fond of the joking, and some of the very best jokes that they made were about the food they had to eat. One soldier said of the cows that were killed for army beef, "It takes 2 soldiers to hold up 1 beef to shoot it." And some of the most colorful comment was about the hardtack, the big, thick sea crackers that was the standard bread ration on the northern side and to some extent on the southern side. A Kansas soldier reported overhearing this dialogue in camp. A sergeant said, "Boys, I was eating a piece of hardtack this morning, and I bit into something soft. What do you suppose it was?" A sergeant responded, "A worm," in a meek manner becoming one of his lowly station. The sergeant immediately retorted, "No, by God, it was a 10-penny nail." The crackers were so often infested with worms that some of the soldiers nicknamed the hardtack worm castles. And one soldier wrote, "All the fresh meat that we had came in the hardtack, and I, preferring my meat cooked, used to toast my hardtack before eating them." Then these soldiers were susceptible on occasion to wickedness, and the sins most common among Civil War soldiers, at least they referred to them as sins, were cussing, and the cussing didn't differ very much from that of today. Indeed, there's little originality in profanity. Gambling. Civil War soldiers were bored. There was no organized entertainment such as we have today, and lacking other diversion, they gambled. Indeed, gambling was so common among the soldiers on both sides that it would hardly be too much to paraphrase the scripture and say that where 2 or 3 Rebs or Yanks were gathered together, there did a deck of cards make its appearance among them, and they did proceed to exchange their meager earnings. They gambled with everything, because cards became very scarce on the Confederate side owing to hard wear and lack of paper. They even utilized the camp lice to gamble with, and this is the way they did it. Each soldier would take a louse and put him in the middle of a tin plate overturned, and that soldier's louse that first vacated the plate would be adjudged the winner. In one series of contests, one soldier's louse won so consistently that the soldiers' comrades became suspicious, and they held an investigation. And you know what they found out that this Reb had been doing? Secretly, before each contest, he had been heating his plate, and thus giving his louse unusual motivation to get off the plate. But it would be easy to exaggerate evil. I should mention drinking, because there was an awful lot of drinking, and you can get some idea of the potency of the stuff they drank from the nicknames that the soldiers applied to it. They called it chain lightning, how come you so, rock me to sleep, mother, tanglefoot, rifle not knee, and one that I like best of all, oh be joyful. But there were many good men on both sides, many devout men, many religious men, many strong in spirituality and in character at the end of their service than at the beginning. One of these was Private Orville Bumpus of Mississippi, who wrote near the end of his service, "Uncontaminated, I left home, and so I intend to return," and he did. The language of the Civil War soldiers was often colorful, sometimes eloquent, and the common soldiers achieved their highest degree of eloquence in denouncing their officers. And I'm going to give you a few sample comments. First, on the Confederate side, one Confederate wrote, "Colonel Henry is an ignoramus, fit for nothing higher than the cultivation of corn." A Floridian wrote, "Our officers are not fit to tote guts to a bear." Sergeant Edwin H. Fay of Louisiana wrote his wife, December 9, 1862, "I saw General Pemberton, and he is the most insignificant puke I ever saw. His head cannot contain enough sense to command a regiment, much less a corps." Jackson, this is W.H. Jackson, the cavalry leader in the West, his soldiers called him Mudwall to keep from getting him confused with his more illustrious counterpart in the East, Stonewall. Jackson runs first, and his cavalry are well drilled to follow their leader. He is not worth shucks, but he is a West Point graduate and therefore must be born to command. Well, turning over to the Yankee side, you have equally disparaging comments. A Massachusetts soldier wrote, "The officers consider themselves as made of different material from the low fellows in the ranks. They get all the glory and most of the pay, and they don't earn 10 cents apiece on the average, the drunken rascals." Private George Gray Hunter of Pennsylvania wrote, "I am well convinced in my own mind that had it not been for officers, this war would have ended long ago." But the statement I liked best on either side was of that Yankee soldier who wrote, "I wish to God one half of the officers were knocked in the head by slinging them up against the other half." Now, what I've said up to now has been in lighter vein and about the less conventional aspects of soldiering. In closing, I want to pay a tribute to these humble men who wore the blue and the gray. In the crucible of war, many of them demonstrated qualities of true greatness. They bore their hardship with great equanimity. Men of both armies often went for days without any other food, save a few grains of corn picked up from the places where the horses fed and parched over the glowing embers of their campfires. You recall that Kirby Smith's men, on their march to Kentucky, marched 90 miles in 3 days, and they lived on green corn during that period. Yanks on the Knoxville campaign of 1863, and Confederates who went with Hood into Tennessee in the winter of 1864, marched for miles over rocky, ice-coated roads without any shoes, leaving traces of their blood along the paths that they trod. And yet they endured such hardship with a minimum of murmur. And in battle, the common soldiers gave a good account of themselves. They proved their gallantry here at Perryville. In their official reports of Perryville, many of the officers pay high tribute to the heroism and bravery of their men. Colonel L.A. Harris, commanding a brigade made up of Ohio, Wisconsin, and Indiana soldiers, stated, "Too much praise cannot be accorded the soldiers, everyone acting like a hero." And then Colonel D.T. Cowan, commanding Dan McCook's 52nd Ohio Regiment, stated in his official report, "Charlie Common, a little drummer boy, having lost his drum, took a musket and fought manfully in the line." I wonder what became of Charlie Common. And I wrote to Irwin Zepp, the capable head of the Ohio State Historical Society and Museum, and he put his staff trying to find out something of the subsequent career of Charlie Common, but he disappears from the records. Finally, many of these soldiers were ennobled in combat. Rebel Private Maddox had his left arm wounded in the Battle of Murfreesboro so that he couldn't shoot his rifle. He went to his colonel and said, "Colonel, my arm is injured. I can't handle my rifle any longer, but I can carry the flag. May I?" Private Maddox knew that the position of regimental color bearer was far and away the most dangerous position in battle. He knew that in his own regiment, in this fight, 3 color bearers had already died in succession as they tried to keep the colors alive. But when the colonel nodded his assent, Private Maddox grabbed the standard with his good arm and bore the colors triumphantly through the remainder of that fight. After the Battle of Hanover Courthouse, at the end of the day, May 27, 1864, a Yankee soldier, whose name I do not know because the colonel who reported it didn't give the name, lay mortally wounded on the field of battle. He saw his colonel walking by. He motioned for the officer to come over. The officer thought that he wanted to send a farewell message to some loved one at home. But when he bent over the prostrate form, what he heard instead was the inquiry, "Colonel, is the day ours?" "Yes," replied the colonel. "Then," said the soldier, with his face lighting up in a smile, "I am willing to die." And he did die, and he was buried there on the field where he gave his life. This humble man had probably never heard of the Battle of Quebec, of the Heights of Abraham, and of the death there of Montcalm and Wolfe, and of their heroic utterances before they expired. But I submit to you that his gallantry was as great as theirs, and his last words no less glorious, and his name deserves fully as much as theirs to be emblazoned on the pages of history. Now, I don't mean to say that all of the common soldiers were heroes. Certainly not. There were a good many unadmirable men on both sides, shirkers and cowards and knaves. But speaking in general, and of the overwhelming majority, their conduct during the war was such as to merit our approbation and pride. Those gallant Rebs who charged the Federal works at Malvern Hill, July 1st, 1862, at Perryville here, 99 years ago tomorrow, and at Cemetery Ridge, July 3rd, 1863, were great soldiers. Equally great were those men in blue who charged through a hell of fire and lead at Kennesaw Mountain and Second Cold Harbor. At Second Cold Harbor, men of Hancock's famous Second Corps, when told that they were going to have to charge a seemingly impregnable position before them, calmly wrote out their names and addresses on slips of paper and pinned these to their blouses so that their bodies could be quickly identified and their folk at home promptly informed of their fate. And in the fighting that followed, probably the bloodiest 20 minutes of the war, thousands of them yielded up their lives on the altar of union, giving their last full measure to the union that they loved so well. These men, blue and gray, in the Civil War, proved themselves worthy ancestors of the khaki-clad heroes who covered themselves with blood and glory at Belleau Wood in World War I and on the beaches of Normandy in World War II. Indeed, the world has known no greater fighters than Johnny Reb and Billy Yank. And why should we not be proud of them and accord them equal honor? For they were magnificent men endowed with those qualities which have made this country great. We're now, in our history, approaching the most critical, the most troublous times that we've ever known. And a great many people are uneasy about the capacity of the American people to stand up in this time of uncertainty and peril that we face. But my study of the records of the Civil War soldiers as they wrote the records themselves causes me to be able to look forward with great confidence. Whatever lies ahead, the Civil War proves that the masses of the people in this country have the endurance and the hardihood and the spiritual stamina to enable this country to meet this crisis successfully. Thank you very much for your kind attention.